I just wanted to say that some of the issues that were raised by middle states, standards. So I was wondering about, what Tara had spoken about and Nicholson about, the drain on students, the drain on faculty, the boundaries that Tara were mentioning between, what students are,
Yes.
expectations are of faculty, and what faculty's, expectations of themselves and to their students are. Could we talk a little bit about that, and because that to me is really, really interesting and important to also think about. I think the technology and everything else is the same. I mean, it's things that we.
That's a good point, Patricia.
Tuli also.
Patricia, if I can just add to that, Patricia, I'd like to welcome Tuli. Hi, Tuli. Thank you
Hi,
for
Tuli.
coming. I hope that your son's concert went well. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, sorry to be late. I had to go for his concert. It was just for 40 minutes. So I had to be
Thank you for coming. But Tuli, to Patricia's point, you wrote about this too, as well, about this, that you recognized in yourself, this boundary between the professional and the personal was starting for you. You were more willing to cross that boundary. And to Patricia's question, you can speak to that. Misun and spoke about exhaustion and fatigue. I mean, there's so much that's psychological and spiritual that was happening to our faculty as well as our students. But yeah. So Tuli, I don't know if you and Patricia and Misun want to get into that, but
yeah, I'll try. Again, I'm sorry to be late to John. Again, such a wonderful discussion happening. So what I felt like before the pandemic is that I am a teacher. I come to class, I give assignments, we talk. We are mostly focusing on the syllabus and what to learn, like student learning outcomes, course learning objectives. Those things were there in the mind. And then COVID happened. So everything kind of needed to be changed with that sudden switch. And again, going back to remote, I had no knowledge about how to teach remotely. So much of learning was happening at that time. And slowly what I realized that with time, that the barrier that me as a teacher who I was aware of my students' struggles, their lived experiences. But what COVID did to me is that it actually exposed it in ways. So for instance, during my, when I switched to remote, I did not have a space or a place to conduct my classes. So they saw me switching from my kitchen to this room to these corners, and I never turned my video off. So I kind of opened my world to them, and I told them, see, there is nothing to be ashamed of. Like, this is a shared space. And slowly what I felt is, they shared their kids' problem. Then there were like moments when one of their family members passed away. So the way I was looking into education as in terms of some tangible like outcomes, it really helped me to rethink through those lens. And I kind of also felt, if I do not value like the humane aspect comes first, then comes those tangible learning outcomes. And somehow it was very rewarding for me, because my students also became more empathetic to the struggles that I was experiencing. And and yes, about the borders, I understand it's something that we all struggle that to draw the line. But I felt by opening those moments and allowing them to be vulnerable, we came to a moment where we celebrated these struggles in a way where we could share, talk. And as Ellen's feedback kind of like reflection say that you are really creating history, because this is something, an unusual moment. It
Yes,
is
I
not
love that.
natural. So that's how I felt about it.
yeah, that was a beautiful comment from Ellen. I love that, to tell this.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that was beautiful.
We're making history.
Thanks for sharing, Julie. And Patricia, your point and Tara's point, I get that for sure. I feel terribly with boundaries. I'm horrible because of my personality, right? And it was very hard for me because last semester I saw students for 12 hours straight. I still do that even now. I'm exhausted, but I see students on Thanksgiving Day. I had students from 12 to 8 p.m. I saw students, I extend a lot of my time. Um, And of course, I have to question boundaries, right? And I've been told many times, you gotta watch your boundaries. You're overextending yourself, but that's just me, and I don't think that's a good thing, right? I don't think that's a good thing, because we do get fatigued, and as Tara said, students forget that we have a life as well. And they would say to me, Professor, why can't you just see me just for 1 hour? But I have a life as well, right? So Tara, I really appreciate your point. And Patricia, I don't know if you want to speak more on that, Tara.
Tara actually and Nicholson went to the other extreme of that. They were, so how do we protect ourselves?
Yes.
How do we get support?
So that's why I want Tara to speak on that. Yeah.
Tara and Nicholson, and I think Wendy also spoke to that in her comments. Yes. So maybe the three of you,
I can learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked in our group about, my reflection was mostly about kind of mismatches in expectations between students and faculty. I mean, Santo talked about like the quick shift to online. And one example of that comes to mind is I talked to students shortly after we went online who were very upset that faculty seemed so unprepared for this change. And I said, we found it out on the tweet from the governor, just like everybody else. Like they had assumed that somehow we must have known this for like a month. And similarly, I've had students even this semester, complaining to me about faculty who are teaching asynchronously, and they perceive it to be faculty just can't be bothered to teach a live class. And I explained to them that I was trained to teach online. I taught fully online classes long before COVID, and that is like best practices in online education is asynchronous instruction, right? And that was the CUNY recommendation. In our case, in our department, that was the recommendation for many different reasons, which I share with them. And they're kind of like, oh, okay. I just thought he didn't want to teach, So, and I think that there's lots of examples of that, like where, what students think college should be in general has always been, sometimes different than what we offer, what we think they should be doing. But I think the distance learning situation just sort of expanded that. And then Wendy added in that, what that has meant, and not just between students and faculty or staff, but also between faculty and staff and each other, like placing all these increased expectations on each other constantly. And, how do we know when to step in and say, I can't do that. Like I have these other things that I have to do. And it's been hard to navigate that boundary because especially in the initial crisis mode, we were in crisis mode. We were trying to do everything that we could. And as this has extended on, I think we realized that how draining it is, how burnt out people feel. And Wendy also brought up, outside of just the LaGuardia context, right? There's the pandemic, there's, racist attacks, and people are grappling with how to respond to these things and, and how and when to bring it into the classroom, how and when to understand that students are also reacting to these things and they are feeling these things. And it's so much harder to have these conversations in Zoom, obviously. And then Misan brought up a point that for her, right, again, feeling that you can never do as much for every single student as they may need. And how do you decide, when, who and when you can help. And sometimes we feel like we're making decisions without enough information about, what students we can give extra time to, and what students may not show up to the meeting. And so how much do you push them to make a meeting with you if they may not actually come? Or, I'm sort of adding to what she said, but I think that there's this this knowledge that we know that we can't, some students have extreme technological challenges. They just don't know how to use the technology. How can we support them? Other students are just not prepared with the time management skills that they need. And so, but when we refer them to outside services, they don't always take advantage of those because they may trust us more, and we know that. And so we want to do it for them, but we can't, right? Yeah. So, we sort of had this back and forth in our group about, what's equitable in terms of making those decisions, and how do we know where our boundaries are? How do we express those boundaries without, cutting off a student who, might have been successful if we hadn't done that.
That is really important.
Faith, could we hear? I'd like to hear, if it's okay, from Wendy and from Misan too. So we thank you for Yeah, but if they speak their own voices, it'd be helpful.
Wendy and I had a lot of back and forth.
And our standard answer is yes, but. So yeah, I mean, this was a difficult topic for us because we could never really come to a conclusion or a solution. It just really went circular, and every time there was a yes, but there was another factor that played into it. But the one thing that the comparison that I gave is I think our students sometimes look at us the same way children look at parents. They don't see them as people. They see them as parents. And when I want something as a child, you're the parent, you give it to me, or you're there for me. And so I think students see us the same way. They see us as the professor, but they don't see us as having a life outside of the campus. You know, what do you mean you can't respond to my email right now? What do you mean you can't, you know, I'm sick. Yes, I understand you're sick, but I don't think they really sort of appreciate that we do other things and we have other responsibilities. But the question that I kept bringing up was, how can we really effectively provide learning for them? How can we give the type of service we do if we are not well ourselves? And that could be physically, emotionally, mentally, right? So if, you know, okay, let's say, it's kind of hard to do that. I have to maintain confidentiality, but let's say you're going into a teaching situation. Let's say I'm going into a teaching situation as a Black female, and there has just been another incident of whatever there might be, police killing of a Black person, the Chauvin trial, all these different things. And I have all this emotion that I'm dealing with and comments from everyone else. How do I now go into this teaching situation and deal with what my syllabus says I need to do for that day, but I still have all this other stuff, right? How do I separate that? Can I separate that? Do I make a decision to give voice to it? Because if I'm dealing with it, my students may be dealing with it as well, right? So how do you make those decisions? And if you give voice to it, you have no idea what's coming back at you. And if the situation sort of goes off the rails, how do you sort of maintain that, make the choice to, you know what, forgo the syllabus for today, we need to do this. But someone in the group might not be happy about it. And then they tell you they're not happy about it. But you as the facilitator or the professor, you had to make that decision. So these are some of those hard things. How do we do that? Because whether we speak about it or not, we're bringing it into the classroom because we're there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
we have all of that. And so, you know, my concern is that educators are dealing with a lot of those things. As I said in our group, a lot of us have dealt with loss during the pandemic, some more personally than others, right? You've had to shift to being home all the time, maybe with young children all the time, or whatever the situation may be. And so you have all of these things, and yet you still have to come and be who your students expect you to be. But then you sort of lose you in that, because now you have all of these other compounded factors. And so how can you effectively teach if you don't have outlets for these particular things? You take a day off, everybody goes into arms because what do you mean you're not here? You know, I gave the example, someone in my department wanted us to do something for students on a Sunday afternoon. I thought they were completely out of their mind. You can't have my Sunday afternoons, right? And for me personally, okay, I'm here for my time, but I'm also a doctoral student. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't want to be awake doing my homework. I certainly don't want to talk to a student, right? So how do we handle those things? How do we find those outlets that are effective for us so that we can come back and be the educators that we are, and so that we're giving students the best of ourselves? Because honestly, I don't think we are. because we just really don't have that. And that's
Yeah.
sort of where we were, and we could not come to a conclusion on that.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. I think you made some really valid points. You know, I will say one word, and that's for all of us. No, it's two words. Be present. Be present. That's it. Be present. But that means being present in your own time, right? And you always have to be present with your students. Just be present. The moment that there is presence and there is communication, is going to make it lighter. But you also have to I know, and there's going to be a whole, okay, don't worry. We don't have much time, but we'll continue.